I'm James Carter, 38, a supervisor at a Texas factory, tethered to a life of duty, wife, kids, routine. Then I met Eli, 23, a new hire with a quiet defiance that unraveled me. His cautious glances in the break room sparked something I'd buried deep, something forbidden. In a world of rules, one look from him threatened to break them all. The factory floor hummed with the relentless churn of machinery, a rhythm that had defined my days for 15 years. I'd climbed the ranks to supervisor, overseeing shifts, signing off on reports, keeping the line moving. It was a life I'd chosen, or one that had chosen me. Married to Sarah for 12 years, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a pickup truck that needed new tires. Stability. That's what I told myself it was. But at night, when the house was quiet, I felt the weight of something else, something I'd pushed down since I was a teenager, when my father's sharp words had taught me to keep certain thoughts locked away. Eli Morgan showed up on a Monday, a new hire fresh out of a community college program. 23, too young for the weariness of the factory, but there he was, assigned to my shift. I noticed him first in the break room, sitting alone at a corner table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't carry himself like the others. No swagger, no loud banter to prove he belonged. Instead, he moved with a careful precision, like someone who'd learned to tread lightly in hostile spaces. When our eyes met, he held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away. My pulse quickened, and I hated myself for it. "Carter, you got the new guy's paperwork?" my co-worker Mike called out, snapping me back. I nodded, flipping through the stack on my clipboard. Eli Morgan, clean record, first job, temporary contract. Nothing remarkable. But something about him stuck with me. A quiet intensity that didn't fit the factory's grind. The first week, I kept my distance. My job was to enforce rules, not break them. I'd seen what happened when lines blurred. Rumors of a manager fired last year for getting too close to a subordinate still lingered. The factory was a small world, and gossip spread faster than machine oil. But Eli was impossible to ignore. During briefings, he listened intently, his focus sharp, like he was memorizing every word. When I passed him on the floor, his shoulder brushed mine once, accidental, but electric. I told myself it was nothing, just a new hire adjusting. But I was lying. By the second week, I was assigned to train him on inventory checks in the storage area. It was just the two of us, surrounded by crates and the faint hum of overhead fans. "You'll get the hang of it," I said, handing him a scanner. His fingers grazed mine as he took it, and he didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. The air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. "You're not like the others," he said suddenly, his voice low, almost a challenge. I froze, unsure if he meant the workers or something else entirely. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, keeping my tone sharp to mask the unease. Eli shrugged, his eyes flickering to mine before dropping to the scanner. "Just an observation." He didn't elaborate, but the words lingered, a spark in the dry tinder of my thoughts. The next day, I caught myself watching him again. He was stacking boxes, movements deliberate, efficient. Another worker, Tom, a loudmouth who thrived on needling the new guys, tossed a jab his way. "You sure you can handle this, college boy?" Eli didn't flinch, just kept working, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. I stepped in, barking at Tom to get back to his station. Eli glanced at me, a faint nod of thanks, and something unspoken passed between us. That night, Sarah asked why I seemed distracted. I brushed it off, blaming a long shift. But lying in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of Eli's gaze, the way it seemed to see through the walls I'd built. I'd grown up in a town where certain truths were sins, where my father's voice still echoed, calling weakness anything that deviated from the path he'd set. I'd buried those feelings, married Sarah, built a life. But Eli was a crack in that foundation, and it scared me how much I wanted to let it widen. By the third week, the tension was a pulse I couldn't ignore. Eli was assigned to my team permanently, and our interactions grew sharper, more loaded. A question about inventory became a lingering pause. A shared task became a moment too close, his breath audible in the quiet. I started volunteering for extra shifts, telling myself it was for the overtime, but I knew better. I was chasing those moments, testing how close I could get without crossing the line. Then came the day that changed everything. We were alone in the storage area, finishing a late inventory check. The rest of the shift had clocked out, leaving the factory eerily still. Eli was logging data, his focus unbroken, but I felt his awareness of me, like a current running beneath the surface. "You ever feel trapped here?" he asked, not looking up. His voice was casual, but the question hit like a blade. I leaned against a crate, crossing my arms. "It's a job. Pays the bills." He set the scanner down, turning to face me. "That's not what I meant." His eyes locked onto mine, steady, unflinching. For the first time, I saw something raw in them. Not fear, not defiance, but a question he wasn't asking outright. My throat tightened. I should have walked away, ended the conversation. Instead, I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of his presence. "Careful, Morgan," I said, voice low. "You're playing a dangerous game." He didn't back down. "Am I?" he asked, his tone soft but pointed. The space between us felt like a live wire, humming with possibility. I could have stopped it there, could have turned and left. But I didn't. And in that moment, I knew the rules I'd lived by were about to break. The factory's rhythm was a constant, but Eli Morgan had become a disruption I couldn't ignore. After our charged exchange in the storage area, I told myself to pull back, to keep things professional. I was James Carter, 38, a supervisor with a family and a reputation to protect. But every time Eli's gaze met mine, the rules I'd lived by felt like chains tightening around me. Training him on inventory had been a mistake. The storage area, tucked away from the main floor, became a crucible for something I wasn't ready to name. We worked side by side, logging shipments, checking counts. His movements were precise, deliberate, but it was the silences that got to me. Moments when our hands brushed, passing a scanner, or when he'd pause, waiting for my next instruction, his presence pulling at me like gravity. I started finding excuses to linger, double-checking lists that didn't need it, asking questions just to hear his voice. One afternoon, as we sorted a late delivery, he spoke up. "You don't talk much about yourself, Carter." His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, searching. I shrugged, keeping my focus on the clipboard. "Not much to say. Job, family, you know how it goes?" He didn't respond right away, just watched me, like he could see the lie beneath my words. "Not really," he said, finally, turning back to the crates. The air shifted, heavier now, and I felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. At home, the cracks were starting to show. Sarah noticed my late hours, my distracted silences. "You're barely here, James," she said one night, her voice tight with frustration. I muttered something about work stress, but it wasn't the factory keeping me awake. It was Eli, his quiet confidence, the way he seemed to know me better than I knew myself. I'd spent years burying feelings I'd been taught were wrong, but they were clawing their way back, stirred by a 23-year-old who shouldn't have mattered. The next day, I overheard a conversation in the break room. Tom, the loudmouth, was griping about a coworker fired for crossing lines with a subordinate. Got what he deserved, Tom sneered. No place for that here. The words hit like a warning shot. I knew the risks, my job, my marriage, my standing in a town that didn't forgive deviations. But when Eli walked in, nodding at me before grabbing his coffee, the risks felt distant, drowned out by the pull between us. By the end of the week, the tension was unbearable. We were alone again, finishing a late shift. Eli was logging the last of the inventory, and I stood closer than I needed to, pretending to check his work. "You're good at this," I said, breaking the silence. He glanced up, a half smile tugging at his lips. "You're not bad yourself, Carter." The way he said my name, low and deliberate, sent a jolt through me. I stepped closer, our shoulders nearly touching. He didn't move away. "You don't belong here," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He set the scanner down, turning to face me fully. "Where do I belong, then?" His voice was steady, but there was a challenge in it, daring me to cross the line I'd been towing for weeks. My pulse hammered. I could have walked away, ended it there. Instead, I held his gaze, the space between us shrinking, until it was just us, the world outside forgotten. That's when Mike walked in. "Carter, you still here?" His voice cut through the moment like a blade. Eli stepped back, grabbing the scanner, his expression unreadable. I nodded at Mike, muttering about finishing up, but my heart was racing. Mike didn't notice anything, or so I thought. But as he left, his glance lingered on Eli, then me, and I felt the first stirrings of dread. The factory wasn't just a workplace, it was a fishbowl, and I was starting to feel the eyes on us. The factory's hum was a constant, but it couldn't drown out the storm building inside me. Eli Morgan had become a fault line in my life, splitting open everything I'd worked to keep buried. At 38, I was James Carter, supervisor, husband, father. Yet every moment with Eli made those labels feel like lies. The tension between us had grown too sharp to ignore, and I was losing the will to fight it. Our moments in the storage area had become a ritual. Late shifts, quiet tasks, stolen glances that lingered too long. Eli's presence was a spark, igniting something I'd suppressed since I was a kid, when my father's cold stare taught me to hide who I was. But with Eli, hiding felt impossible. His quiet confidence, the way he challenged me without words, pulled me closer each day. I knew the risks: my job, my family, the judgment of a town that didn't forgive men like me. But the pull was stronger than the fear. One evening, alone in the storage area, the air felt heavier than usual. Eli was logging inventory, his focus steady, but I caught the way he paused when I moved closer. "You're too quiet today, Carter," he said, not looking up. His voice was low, teasing, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing the water. I leaned against a crate, arms crossed, trying to keep my tone steady. "Just thinking." He set the scanner down, turning to face me. "About what?" His eyes locked onto mine, unflinching, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Before I could answer, I stepped forward, closing the distance. Our faces were inches apart, the silence roaring. I wanted to say something to stop this, but my hand moved instead, brushing his arm. His breath caught, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then slowly he leaned in, and our lips met. A brief electric connection that shattered every boundary I'd set. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a surrender. I pulled back, heart pounding, but Eli's gaze held no regret, only certainty. That's when the door creaked open. Mike, my co-worker, stood there, his eyes narrowing. "Carter, what the hell's this?" His voice was sharp, accusing. Eli stepped back, his expression guarded, while I scrambled for words. "Just finishing up," I said, but my voice betrayed me, unsteady. Mike's stare lingered, cold and calculating, before he turned and left, without another word. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. The next day, Mike cornered me in the break room. "I saw you with the kid," he said, his voice low, venomous. "You think you can play games here? I could ruin you." My stomach dropped. He wasn't just threatening my job. He was dangling my entire life over the edge. "Keep your mouth shut, and maybe I won't talk," he added, smirking. "But I need a favor. Overlook some missing stock. You're good at looking the other way, right?" The implication was clear. Comply, or he'd expose me. I should have reported him, but fear stopped me. Exposure meant losing everything. Sarah, the kids, my place in a community that would brand me an outcast. I avoided Eli, skipping our usual shifts together, but the guilt gnawed at me. He noticed, his glances turning confused, then hurt. One night he caught me alone in the hallway. "What's going on, James?" he asked, his voice raw. "Did I do something?" I wanted to tell him about Mike, about the trap closing around us, but the words wouldn't come. "It's nothing," I lied, turning away. The pain in his eyes cut deeper than I expected. At home, Sarah's questions grew sharper. "You're not yourself," she said, her tone laced with suspicion. I couldn't meet her eyes. The life I'd built felt like a house of cards, and Eli was the wind threatening to topple it. I was betraying him by pulling away, betraying Sarah by wanting him, betraying myself by pretending I could go back to who I was. Mike's threat loomed, a noose tightening with every day I stayed silent. And Eli was the only thing that felt real, but I was too scared to hold on. The factory's endless grind couldn't mask the chaos inside me. Eli Morgan had become my unraveling, and pulling away from him hadn't stopped the ache, it had only made it worse. At 38, I, James Carter, was a man divided, a supervisor clinging to control, a husband hiding from his wife's suspicions, and someone who couldn't outrun the truth Eli had forced me to face. Mike's threat to expose us hung over me like a blade, and every day I stayed silent, it cut deeper. Eli's hurt was palpable. His glances, once warm and daring, now carried a quiet betrayal. I'd avoided our shifts together, dodging the storage area where our connection had sparked. But the factory was too small to escape him entirely. During a morning briefing, he stood at the back, arms crossed, his silence louder than any words. I fumbled through my instructions, feeling his gaze like a weight. When I dismissed the team, he lingered, stepping close as the others filed out. "You owe me an explanation, James," he said, voice low but sharp. I wanted to tell him about Mike's blackmail, about the fear choking me, but all I managed was, "It's complicated." He shook his head, walking away, and the distance between us felt like a wound. At home, Sarah's patience was fraying. "You're shutting me out," she said one night, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. I couldn't argue. She was right. My thoughts were consumed by Eli, by the life I'd buried long ago under my father's expectations and a town's judgment. I'd grown up hearing that men like me were broken, that love like this was a sin. Now those lessons were a cage, and Eli was the key I was too scared to use. Mike's pressure didn't let up. He cornered me again, his smirk colder now. "Stock's still missing, Carter. You gonna help, or do I tell everyone about your little friend?" His words twisted the knife. I knew the missing stock was his doing, a side hustle he'd been running for months. Agreeing meant betraying my integrity. Refusing meant risking exposure. I stalled, saying I'd think it over, but time was running out. Rumors were already spreading. Workers whispered about my late shifts, my distraction. Tom, the loudmouth, made a snide comment about favorites on the floor, his eyes flicking to Eli. The factory was closing in, and I was running out of places to hide. Desperate, I turned to Laura, a longtime co-worker I trusted. In a quiet moment after a shift, I confessed part of the truth. Not about Eli, but about Mike's scheme. "He's stealing stock, Laura, threatening to pin it on me if I don't play along." Her face hardened, but then softened with something worse. Disappointment. "You've been off, James. People notice. Fix this before it's too late." Her words stung, but they weren't wrong. I'd let fear dictate my choices, and it was costing me everything. That night, I found Eli in the break room, alone, staring at his phone. I couldn't keep avoiding him. "Mike saw us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's holding it over me." Eli's eyes widened, then narrowed. "So you just shut me out?" His hurt cut deeper than Mike's threats. "I thought you were different." Before I could respond, he stood and left, the door slamming behind him. I'd betrayed him, not by choice, but by cowardice. The next day, Mike upped the ante. "Time's up, Carter," he said, tossing a falsified inventory log at me. "Sign it, or I talk." My hands shook as I held the paper. Signing meant complicity in his theft. Refusing meant he'd expose me, and Eli would pay the price too. I thought of my father's voice calling me weak. I thought of Sarah's growing distance, the kids I'd lose if this came out. But most of all, I thought of Eli, the way he'd looked at me, trusting, before I'd let him down. I made my choice. I took the log to Laura, told her everything, Mike's theft, his blackmail, my fear. I didn't mention Eli by name, but she saw the truth in my eyes. "You're better than this, James," she said, taking the log. "Let me handle Mike." It was a risk, but I was done hiding. The factory's walls felt tighter than ever, but for the first time I saw a way through. Not to safety, but to something honest. The factory's hum had once been my anchor, but now it was a reminder of everything I'd nearly lost. Eli Morgan's absence left a void I couldn't ignore. And at 38, I, James Carter, was facing the wreckage of my choices. Mike's blackmail had pushed me to the edge, and my silence had hurt Eli more than I could bear. With Laura now holding the evidence of Mike's theft, I was at a crossroads, clinging to a life built on lies, or stepping into the unknown. Eli's contract was ending, his last day looming. I hadn't spoken to him since our confrontation in the break room. His words, "I thought you were different," still burning in my mind. I'd betrayed his trust, let fear drive a wedge between us. The factory buzzed with its usual rhythm, but the whispers about me had grown louder. Tom's snide remarks about favorites had spread, and I caught co-workers' glances, some curious, some judgmental. My marriage was unraveling too. Sarah's questions had turned to accusations. "Who are you, James?" she'd asked last night, her voice breaking. I had no answer. Not yet. Laura moved fast. She turned Mike's falsified log over to management, and by midday, he was called into the office. I watched from a distance as he stormed out, his face red, escorted by security. Laura had kept my name out of it, but her look when she passed me said enough. Fix your life. Mike's exposure lifted one weight, but the bigger one remained. My truth, still buried, and Eli, who I'd pushed away. I found him during his final shift, stacking crates in the storage area. The place where we'd first connected now felt like a battlefield. He didn't look up as I approached, his movements sharp, deliberate. "Eli?" I said, my voice low. He paused, then kept working. "What do you want, Carter?" His tone was cold, but the hurt beneath it was raw. I swallowed, stepping closer. "I'm sorry, for shutting you out, for letting fear win." He finally met my eyes, wary, but listening. "Mike's gone," I continued. "He was stealing, blackmailing me. I should have told you." Eli set the crate down, his shoulders tense. "You let me think I was nothing to you." His words cut deep, but he was right. I'd chosen safety over him, over myself. "You weren't," I said. "You're the only thing that's felt real in years." His expression softened, just for a moment, but the gap between us remained. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. "What happens now?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew I couldn't let him walk away without something honest. Before his shift ended, I slipped a note into his locker, an apology, a promise to face my truth, and a number he could reach me at if he ever wanted to. It wasn't much, but it was all I could offer without risking his future or mine. As he left the factory that night, he glanced back, our eyes meeting one last time. There was no smile, no nod, just a quiet understanding. Then he was gone. The fallout came fast. Sarah confronted me again, sensing the truth I couldn't say aloud. "You're not happy, James," she said, tears in her eyes. "And neither am I." We agreed to separate, a painful but honest step. The town's judgment followed, whispers at church, cold shoulders from neighbors. But Laura's words echoed, "You're better than this." I quit the factory, taking a lower-paying job at a community center, where I started volunteering to support others struggling with their identity. It was small, but it felt like a start. Months later, I heard through a co-worker that Eli had moved to Austin, working at a tech startup, living openly as himself. The news stung, but it also sparked hope. I wasn't there yet, but I was trying. One evening, alone in my apartment, I wrote a letter I'd never send, thanking him for waking me up. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of freedom, not from the world's judgment, but from my own. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was finally walking it as myself. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. More stories are coming that will move you, inspire you, and challenge the way you see your own journey. Every story matters, and each one brings us closer to who we are meant to become.